From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Hey, thanks for joining me today. I am so excited about my guest this week. He's been on the show twice, and this is my third interview because he's got so much to talk about. He's got so much of a career. I don't use the word legend much often, but he's kind of in there. My guest today, Phil Keaggy. Phil, thank you so much for being back on the show.
You're welcome, Rick. Good to talk to you today again. I'm glad for the opportunity to share some of my memories with you.
Oh, great. I'm glad you could still remember.
I'm glad, too. Thinking about remembering, it's interesting. This past weekend, I did 2 concerts with my old bandmates, Glass Harp and Daniel Pecchio and John Safara, the 3 of us. And we did 2 shows in Cleveland at the Music Box, and we had 2 fantastic nights. In fact, it was interesting because all those songs, they all came back to me, and the songs we did in the early 70s, and then we did some recordings in the early 2000s, and we did some of those songs, and it was great playing with the guys and talk about memory and memories. They were both sold-out shows in Cleveland. It was a dinner club called the Music Box, and we had about 400 people a night. Old friends that would come up to us and say, "Hey, we were at your concerts, when you played JB's in Kent, 50 years ago in 69 and 70." and they said, "You guys sound just like you did then." And I thought that was pretty nice, so I'm glad for that.
That's amazing. I don't know. You've got like 40 albums out. I mean, I don't even know how many. There's so many. Maybe it's 50. I mean, have you ever counted?
No, I haven't really. Somebody has, I think, but I haven't.
I mean, you could easily have 50 different albums out, and you're pulling back stuff from early 70s. Does the muscle memory just come back? How does that work with all those songs, all those lyrics? Do you have to work to kind of remember what that lyric was?
Well, there was a fella there named Ralph Jeske and his brother Ray, and Ralph he's been through a lot. He's a cancer survivor, and he said certain songs from my past really meant a lot to him and helped him, encouraged him a great deal in his faith when he was suffering and going through a lot of stuff. So on the second night, I was to do 2 songs on my own aside from the band, and when he asked for Let Everything Else Go and Take Me Closer, well, Let Everything Else Go I know pretty well. Take Me Closer, I haven't done it in quite a long time, and so I just did it on my electric. And the beginning of Take Me Closer from the Love Broke Through album has got this this groove thing happening, and then there's this harmony thing that happens I do between an overdub guitar and the initial guitar, the original tracking guitar, and I used my looper, and every note just came to me. And I'm just grateful for the ability that God gives us to remember something that you haven't done in a long time. Now, I don't remember everything, but I do remember a great deal. And so that made his day. He said it actually made his year. So I'm really grateful for that.
That album was 1976. Take Me Closer to Your Side.
That's
Take
the
me
one.
closer to you.
Yep.
I remember it.
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
Yeah, I remember it too, and just pause a second. I'll grab a guitar and I'll play a bit of it for you.
Oh, great.
Hold on.
Coming up, we weren't planning on this, but live on the Rick Altizer Show, we've got Phil Keaggy. Take Me Closer. He's grabbing his guitar right now. This is unplanned.
Here we go. Right? closer to your side. Take me closer to you. Take me closer to your side. Take me closer to you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Woohoo!
From 1976, the guy's still got it in his brain.
I do. So anyway.
That is amazing. I love it. I don't know if you can tell, but I was singing backgrounds.
I heard that. You are a good singer. I've heard your recordings. Yes, I have.
Oh, anyway. Hey, that was awesome. Completely unplanned here on the Rick Altizer Show. That's Phil Keaggy live. And, I'd love to talk with you if you don't mind, kind of about that era, that period from kind of Love Broke Through on. Okay. In our other two interviews, and for those who missed the interviews, you can go to the Rick Altizer Show podcast. Basically, anywhere podcasts are played, you can grab that show and hear it. Both of these shows, and also it's on my website, rickaltizer.com. You can go there as well. Mm-hmm. And we talk about kind of Phil's early life, his salvation experience, the early days of Christian music, and also talked about, I'll just throw this in there, the new album you've got with Rex Paul, Illumination, that's also out now, and we talked about that in those. So, and people, you can get more information about that album by going to philkeaggy.com.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It's a great record, man. It's great to hear you just blasting, big band rocking album. You and Rex Paul did a great job on that. Fantastic.
Yeah, I kudos to Rex. I got to tell you, he's a very gifted musician. He's par excellent, in the studio. Plays drums, keys, guitar, bass, great voice, great harmonies. And it was a pleasure. It was probably the easiest album I've ever made. And that and acoustic sketches, that was pretty easy too, back in the mid 90s. But
one of the 50 albums you've made.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, from Love Broke Through, actually, there's an album that came after that called Emerging that isn't on your website. Just want to let you know that. No, you don't have Emerging on there.
I know it's not on there, but neither is Love Broke Through. So what can I say? I have it. Yeah. I have Love Broke Through remastered. David Harris, who's a great guy, great producer, produced Mickey Dolenz album that I played on some years ago called Remember. He mastered it for me, remastered it. What a Day was remastered, and I think it is on the website. I'm just, having to wait till there's some funds that we could, manufacture some. People aren't really buying CDs like they used to. No, they don't. Things have changed a lot, so.
10 years ago, there were almost 1 billion CDs sold in America, almost 1 billion. And last year, there was 50 million. So it went from 1,000 million down to 50 million.
Wow.
That's how many people are buying CDs right now.
Okay.
So I want to talk about that a little bit. You kind of started out with as we talked in our earlier interviews. So I don't want to really go there again because we've covered that. And people can check that out. But I'd love to talk about when the 80s came and you start really coming into your own as a solo artist. It's Phil Keaggy, and the albums say Phil Keaggy, and people start coming to see you. And I think in the 80s you had 8 different albums come out, and you had Flipside and Town to Town and Play Through Me and Getting Closer. I mean, just you had all these great albums. Sunday's Child I just loved because it was so Beatley. But you started having success as a solo artist. What was some of the things you were going through? What were some of the challenges you were having to deal with, and some of the new things that were happening as a solo artist, going live, having a band, and all the things that kind of curtail with that?
Well, I left Glass Harp initially in August 72, and then January I did What a Day. So that was my first solo project. And not only was it a solo project, but I played all the instruments and I did all the singing. And then Love Broke Through was produced by Buck Herring, a producer of Second Chapter of Acts, in 1976. And that was also a solo venture. Then I did a band album, the Phil Keaggy Band, with Lynn Nichols, Phil Madeira, Dan Cunningham, Terry Anderson, in 77. And then in 78, I did another solo project called The Master and the Musician. So really, in the 70s, three of my four releases were solo,
And you were really starting to get known during that time, kind of establishing yourself as a solo artist. And then in the 80s, it seemed like you started kind of rising to what I would say there's kind of like an upper echelon of the Christian music people, and you were kind of up there, and you were just always on the radio, always there, putting out, like I said, almost an album every year.
Well, I signed to Sparrow with the help of Buck Herring. I signed Billy Ray Hearn, who founded Sparrow Records, and actually he founded Myrrh Records back in the early 70s. But I signed, and then the first album I did for Sparrow was called Flipside, and it was produced by Dan Collins, and that album was the result of a new move in our lives. We moved from New York State to Kansas City, Leawood, Kansas specifically, and we were expecting Alicia, our daughter, who is now 39 years old, and so I started writing songs, reflecting my feelings toward my family in a more serious way. Spend My Life With You, for instance, on that album, was a song that was initially to be a lullaby I wrote for Alicia, but then it took on a deeper meaning about my relationship as a child of God, as God my Father, and so that's why, there are lines in there that say, "See you when I rise," and stuff like that. And Little Ones was another song that I wrote because my wife and I had, as I had told earlier, we lost children 3 times, premature babies and a miscarriage. And so just 2 weeks before Alicia was born, I was aware of, the sanctity of life and the fragility of these little ones, and how their lives are on the line, as I speak of in the song, as I sing of it. And so I wrote that song, and that was on the album. There's another song called A Child in Everyone's Heart. And so I was thinking a lot about, the gift of family, the gift of life. And so that was a real important thing to me. One interesting side note, someone said to the record company, "You should release A Child in Everyone's Heart as a single." And the record company refused. They said it wouldn't work. So I never really did have that many singles. But, Christian radio did play a number of my songs in those days,
the next album, Town to Town, had Full Circle. And, of course, that was a big hit.
Mm-hmm. And
that time you're talking about children and how having children and having a family and the importance of that. Mm-hmm. But around 1980, you kind of got in. I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, a mill, but you got in a pattern of pretty much an album every year, going on a tour. Uh-huh. And it seemed like you really got into just really getting into a pattern of that. How did that work as far as schedule, conflicts, working with a band? What was that life like back then?
Well, I think, as I remember it, the first band I put together had players like Doug Pinnick and Jerry Gaskill, who eventually started King's X. And there was Bruce Hibbard, and then we put a group on tour in June 1980 that had Peter York on guitar, Phil Madeira on keys, Greg Exvols on vocals and guitar. Let's see, who drummed on that? Could have been Jerry Gaskill and Doug Pinnock on bass, Jerry Gaskill on drums. So there were 6 of us in the group, and we were a really good band, and there was great variety of vocalizing. You know, there was Phil could sing, Doug could sing, Greg Exvols could sing, Peter could sing, and we were a good band. There was a lot of good harmonies, a lot of energy. But I was never a big fan of going away from home for a long period of time. And then through the 80s with Town to Town, there were more tours. There was a season of solo dates. And then there was, I did some albums in the mid-80s like Way Back Home, Wind in the Wheat, which both were a pleasure to do because I loved recording even more than traveling and doing concerts, actually. And then I got signed. I left Sparrow after the 3rd album, which was called Play Through Me. And it's an interesting thing about those 3 Sparrow albums. I have this not love-hate, but like-dislike sort of a view of those particular albums because I think I was not that much of a real mature songwriter, and I was kind of aware of it. So some of the songs I recorded because they were just there, you know, and they weren't always the best songs. But there were some gems like Let Everything Else Go, Spend My Life With You, Little Ones, Full Circle, Rise Up, O Men of God, What a Wonder You Are was a good song. And but then I left Sparrow and signed to Word Records, and I was on the Myrrh label, and that's when Lynn Nichols produced Sunday's Child. And that was a real adventure because of all the different people who were involved in that album. You know, we had Russ Taff, Randy Stonehill. But it was a good album. There was a lot of good energy. You know, one of the songwriters was Steve Taylor, and on one of the songs. But my favorite songs on that album, I think, are the Mark Hurd songs. Those are good. There was a good tune called, I wrote with Randy Stonehill. He was on that album, and Sunday's Child, and Ain't Got
Yeah, you've
No.
had so many collaborations working with so many people. I mean, pretty much a who's who list of Christian music you have worked with, written with, performed with, had on your record, been on their records. By the way, you're listening to the Rick Altizer Show, and my guest today is singer, songwriter, and guitar player Phil Keaggy. We're talking about just kind of about his career, and you can get more information on Phil and the new album with Rex Paul called Illumination. I highly recommend it. It rocks. It's wonderful, and you can get more information at philkeaggy.com. So, you know, I would like to talk about, if we can kind of switch a bit, we've talked about this list of albums that were made back in the 80s, late 70s, mid 70s, 80s, 90s, and then you can't find them.
No.
They're not on your website. They're not on iTunes. They're not on Amazon. They don't exist. And I'd like to discuss how Christian music doesn't seem to have much in the way of history of artists. They don't really do much in archiving history, whereas in the secular community, they archive artists. It's important for them to make sure the artist's catalog is available. Whereas in the Christian music industry, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I'd love to get your take on that, because you have some amazing albums that are not available. You can't get.
That's true.
You know, legally. So how do you? I'd love your take on that.
Well, say for instance, you know, Wind in the Wheat and Love Broke Through. I own both those albums, and but I have to work with a team of people that can help me get it out. I'm a musician. I don't know how to do the business of music. Never did very well, and I can record it. I can write it. You know, I can perform it. You know, try to communicate what's inside of me artistically and spiritually. But when it comes to getting my stuff out, you know, now Rex is really good at that. We got promotion going on, and we've got publicity going on for it. My last album, which was a few years ago, called All at Once, just completely tanked. It just didn't appeal to anybody in the business or the industry in terms of distributors or labels. So it's just out there. One time I asked an executive to one of the record labels I was signed to back in the 90s. It was an album called Crimson and Blue, and we put out an album called Blue that had a few different songs, and it had a bit more of a rockin' attitude to it. And I asked this fella, I said, so how's Blue doing out there? He goes, well, it's out there. And that was in the days when there was some distribution, but there was not a lot of promotion. I think it's kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I just feel that, I guess as time went on, more and more artists came into the roster of these labels, and I think the music business, being the business that it is, really, I think, put more emphasis on what was really marketable, and I don't think I was ever that marketable. I think I have talent that God has given me, and I was blessed with somewhat of a voice to sing and the ability to play guitar and to write a few good songs here and there. But I don't think I was a poster child for, a poster artist, if you could put it that way. I never saw myself that way as much, and I'm sure the labels never saw myself that way as much. I think in the day when I was younger, a lot of energy, a lot of creativity going on, like the Wind in the Wheat, the Master Musician, Beyond Nature. Well, Wind in the Wheat and Beyond Nature did get Dove Awards, but I was never nominated for anything in the area of any of the vocal albums, because, well, you just come to your own conclusion about that. It's just that not only were these labels started out as Christian record labels, but they ended up being bought out by major businesses, secular businesses, whether it's Warner, Sony, or Capitol, or EMI, or Warner, those labels, those kind of labels. And the main thing was the P&L, the profit and loss, and how can they make good revenue from these projects. Another thing was
sure, it's not a ministry, it's a business. They have to make profit, or they can't keep making records.
Yeah,
they can't do it.
Right, and in the
you know what? This is. You're not going to believe this, but we're running out of time. Can you believe that?
Well, can I just say one more thing? In the early days, none of us were looking to have a hit record. We weren't. We just wanted to share Jesus through our music, and that was the main thing, And the thing is, I don't have any bitterness in my heart, toward the executives. I really don't. I'm on good terms with all my former people that I worked with in the business. We are brothers, and that's the way it is, and that's the way I want to leave it. I love these guys and all the other people that worked in the companies, and I'm really grateful for the life that I've had, and a wonderful wife and wonderful children. And the opportunity in this country, this great land of ours, to make music and to travel the country and freely play the gospel through my songs. And so I really, I'm really grateful. And I think I've been blessed.
It's such a blessing. You've been so creative. You do have so many different styles. And as we talked about in our last interview, you're still creating. You're still... every year, sometimes three projects in a year. You're so productive, and what a blessing. And you can get more information about Phil. Phil is still out there playing, and you can find out where he is and see him. And that was so great to hear about the Glass Harp reunion in Cleveland a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. But you can get more information and check out. I encourage you to check out the new album Illumination with Rex Paul, and that's at philkeaggy.com. And Phil, I just thanks again for interview number 3. As always, it's just been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I appreciate your time so much.
You're welcome, Rick. And let me just add one last thing. I want my listeners out there to know that there's a good album with Jeff Johnson called Cappadocia, that is an instrumental project that is beautiful. And I want to say thanks to Jeff for giving me the opportunity to make a third album with him. And also The Bucket List with Tony Levin and Jerry Marotta. That's new, too. Mm-hmm. You can find that on iTunes. But the Illumination album is a strong vocal album that I'm very pleased with. So thank you, Rex, for producing that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Phil, for being so productive. Thank you so much for your time.
And God bless you, Rick, and all the best to you.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.